for the Powering a New Generation of Community Energy, the New York Prize Microgrid Competition and Critical Facility Resiliency webinar. We will jump right into the presentation today. Just advance my slides. For those of you who are joining us for a webinar for the first time, I'd like to give a brief introduction of Agrion. Agrion is a member-based global business network for energy, clean tech, and sustainability. We create both digital and physical marketplaces for lead generation and advancement towards a cleaner infrastructure. We manage a number of communities, including energy storage and microgrids, that we assemble using different mediums as prompted by the needs of the industry and our members. We host roundtable discussions and workshops. We put on webinars such as this one. And we function as a research firm producing industry content through best practice reports, white papers, and snapshots. Our work with distributed energy resources is also fairly comprehensive. We spearheaded a public-private partnership that led to the development of gridmarket.com, an online platform focused on energy storage, and we're expanding that to include microgrids. It's a central information repository and the digital marketplace, which is gridmarket.com. We've also conducted feasibility studies for DER projects, and we offer our services to assist in the application process for the Demand Management Program, incentives, and now the New York Prize. So to learn more about our services and how we can help you, feel free to contact me at brian.cabezas@agrion.org or visit Agrion's website, agrion.org. And with that, I will turn the webinar over to our moderator, Jim Gallagher, Executive Director of the New York State Smart Grid Consortium. Jim, I'm going to transfer rights to you now, and you may begin.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, Brian, and welcome everyone who's joining the webinar. Again, I'm Jim Gallagher, Executive Director of the New York State Smart Grid Consortium and moderator of this webinar. Before I review the agenda, just very briefly, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we're intending to do today, and primarily it's to provide details regarding New York State's New York Prize competition and to provide everyone with an opportunity to learn about the program from state officials, including representatives from NYSERDA, New York State Division of Homeland Security, and the New York State Department of Public Service, everyone working together to help implement New York Prize. New York Prize, for those who are not familiar with the program, it's the first in the nation $40 million competition to create community microgrid systems that are intended to reduce costs, promote clean energy, and also build reliability and resiliency into our power grid. During the session today, we're going to discuss details of the program, including competition eligibility requirements. And we will also attempt to highlight, after we go through New York Prize, some of the major takeaways from the recently completed Critical Facility Resiliency Study that was managed by NYSERDA. So to turn to the agenda, I want to introduce you briefly to the consortium. I also want to introduce you very briefly to the New York Reforming the Energy Vision proceeding, which is providing an overarching policy structure for initiatives such as New York Prize. I'm then going to turn it over to Micah Koch from NYSERDA, who is the director of the New York Prize program. And following Micah, we will refer to the application process, the structure, and the timing of the program, and that portion of the agenda will be covered by John St. Cross of NYSERDA. At the conclusion of John's presentation, we will give you a summary of the New York State Critical Facility Resiliency Report I just mentioned, and we have Mike Razanowski, who is going to be assisting with that presentation. Mike is from NYSERDA, Tammy Mitchell from the Department of Public Service, and Chuck Phillips from the Department of Homeland Security. Then, as a wrap-up, we are going to have a question and answer session, which I will be moderating, and I will be taking the questions that are submitted online and making sure that I get them to the appropriate person. Just briefly, a little bit about the New York State Smart Grid Consortium. It's a unique public-private partnership that is intended to promote broad statewide implementation of a safe, secure, and reliable grid. It's made up of New York's leading utilities, technology providers, educational institutions, research laboratories, and public agencies that are all dedicated to deploying advanced energy technology to better meet consumer needs. The organization has been in place for a little over 4 years, and again, it is a nonprofit organization intended to be a forum for state policymakers and other facilities and organizations within the state to try to address barriers to a more modernized grid within the state. The consortium's mission, primarily ongoing advocacy of smart grid and grid modernization. We attempt to maintain a vision of the future grid, advocating benefits for producers, suppliers, consumers. We work to educate public, the regulators, the policymakers, and most importantly, our emphasis is on aggressive real-world projects, and that includes the New York Prize program, the Microgrid initiative we're going to be talking about today, and also the New York PSC's Reforming the Energy Vision proceeding. And it is that proceeding that I want to spend a moment on, just giving you a high-level overview. This proceeding was begun in 2014, often referred to as the REV proceeding, and it is intended to address fundamental changes in the way utilities provide distribution service. And the objective is to better align the practices of utilities and regulation with the advances that we're seeing in technology, including in the areas of information management, pricing, power generation, and distribution. And the objective of REV is also overall to improve system efficiency, give customers better choices, and encourage greater penetration of clean generation and energy efficient technologies and practices. I want to very briefly, before turning it over to Micah and getting into New York Prize, bring you up to date on one new initiative within the REV proceeding, and that's in January this year, just several weeks ago. An administrative law judge at the Department of Public Service issued a ruling to convene 2 working groups. These working groups, approximately 20 people each, experts from within the state and outside the state, are to address REV market design issues as well as platform technology issues. The idea would be that these working groups would recommend to the Commission market rules and also technical standards that will help guide utility distribution system implementation plans, which are expected to be filed at the end of this year. And importantly, this initiative is co-facilitated by Department of Public Service staff, the New York State Smart Grid Consortium, and Rocky Mountain Institute. And we just had our first kickoff meeting for these working groups on January 29th. So you'll be hearing much more about these initiatives. With that, I would like to turn it over to Micah Koch from NYSERDA, who will be giving us an overview of the program and also giving us a little context in how it is integrated with the overall REV proceeding.
All right, great. Thank you, Jim. NYSERDA is pleased to support the consortium and really grateful for your leadership and help in launching New York Prize. I'd also like to thank our other partners at the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery, the New York Power Authority, the Department of Public Service, and the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, and all the other stakeholders whose efforts have really been instrumental in bringing this aspirational program to life. So quick programming note, if you plan on submitting to New York Prize, RFP 3044, NYSERDA will respond to inquiries directly relevant to the competition and our application process during our official outreach session, which will take place this coming Wednesday, February 25th at 10 a.m. The event dial-in number, in case you're still having problems seeing the slides, is 877-616-4349, and the conference ID is 898-50133. And so again, that is specifically for questions relevant to your application for for New York Prize. So with the establishment of NYSERDA's Smart Grid program in 2006, New York really has been at the forefront of microgrid research and electric transmission and distribution system change, and I'm going to refer to that as T&D. In 2010, NYSERDA released our first report on barriers and opportunities for microgrids in New York, which really is a must-read and provides a strong foundation for the microgrids for critical facility resiliency report, which my colleague Mike Razanowski is going to tell you about a little bit more later on. Those reports really are the forebearers of New York Prize, which is a three-stage competition leading to large-scale demonstration projects that are designed to optimize grid resiliency and consumer load flexibility. New York Prize is an initiative of Governor Cuomo to address the resilience of our electric infrastructure in light of extreme weather events like Sandy, Irene, and Lee. It's our hope that this really will inform the REV regulatory process and ultimately will result in at least 5 what we call REV labs across the state where community microgrids can be used to show a path to a stronger bulk power system via an increase in distributed energy resources, DER, greater system efficiency, affordability, choice, and control for customers. This is kind of what we're after. So, as Jim mentioned, one of the fundamental recognitions in the REV proceeding is that our electricity grid contains a diverse set of value streams related to data, customer satisfaction, reliability and resilience, convenience, and ancillary services, amongst others. Some of these societal benefits are not valued by regulators or by the market today, but may be in the future, which is why it's vital that New York Prize projects show how new technologies and business models can capitalize on these various value streams and how benefits can be distributed between the utility, third party, and customers. So New York Prize should really help identify the kinds of price signals, tariffs, data, and consumer protections that are necessary to scale these opportunities and ensure they're not one of a kind, but rather first of their kind. So path to scale and potential for replicability need to be on your radar, even if you're thinking about applying for this Stage 1 RFP for feasibility. This is the new NYSERDA, and we're going to work with you to help validate technology integration performance and navigate new regulatory change. A primary driver for this change is that traditional sources of energy have been expensive, inefficient, and pollution creates public health impacts and costs, particularly in low and moderate income communities across New York State where energy costs hit families disproportionately harder. Many of the 300 plus people who are logged on here might have participated in the statewide energy tour that we just wrapped up. And it's our belief that designing projects with grassroots support, similar to the approach taken by the 66 New York Rising communities, starting with what's most beneficial for electric customers, will yield maximum value for businesses, consumers, and local governments. Community engagement really is a critical component in the Clean Energy Fund proposal and supports REV. Local leaders and engaged communities are vital partners in creating the conditions for the grid to become a modern, dynamic platform that hosts a wide range of solutions and better supports the technologies, trends, and needs of the 21st century. I just want to take a minute here to note that we're not taking an all-or-nothing approach with New York Prize. So even if the competition does not result in a community microgrid, there are a number of statewide programs, some offered by NYSERDA, some by NYPA, some by other agencies, that will be highlighting that support energy efficiency, combined heat and power, community solar, or storage, all of the things that might lead to a community microgrid at some point down the line. So while these are exciting times and the momentum is real, the challenges that we face collectively are daunting. Huge portions of the electric grid are aging and increasingly stressed during periods of peak demand and extreme weather. 43% of the state's 11,000 miles of transmission lines will require replacement in the next 30 years, and 7% of our energy is wasted via line losses across both T&D systems. Driven in large part by recent major storms, the T&D system will require hardening and costly upgrades to maintain system reliability. As we harden these systems, we need to do it smarter. For the first time, and in cooperation with the investor-owned utilities here in New York, NYSERDA has highlighted through the New York Prize Opportunity Zone map the approximate geographic areas that have been identified by the local electric distribution companies in New York where microgrids may reduce utility system constraints and defer expensive infrastructure investment costs. The Opportunity Zone map also shows critical infrastructure within these opportunity zones. But to be clear, any community in New York State is eligible to apply for New York Prize. You do not need to be in an opportunity zone to apply or to win. However, projects in the opportunity zones have additional utility and system-wide benefits. So with this call for feasibility studies, we've really thrown down the gauntlet for community microgrid projects that test new services and business models and provide the investor-owned utility with experience managing the grid with distributed resources. New York is looking for community microgrids that incorporate clean distributed generation, energy storage, demand response, and importantly, energy efficiency. Prize is not about backup standby generators. I want to say that one more time. New York Prize is not about backup standby generators. We are purposefully technology agnostic, and we will fund generation. We're not about single customer microgrids that benefit one load behind the meter. We are about extending today's proven microgrid model to the next level, serving multiple customers, including at least one critical facility with an ability to island, as well as benefit the bulk power system during normal blue sky operating conditions. We know that there are technical and regulatory barriers to achieving this vision. However, as evidenced by the December 12th notice from DPS seeking REV demonstration projects, utilities and third-party companies will have regulatory leeway to identify and test new business models. In so doing, New York Prize projects will illustrate what a REV future could look like and inform the regulatory proceeding itself. So the last point I want to make before I hand it over to John is I want to note that people beyond New York are watching how you respond to this opportunity. In fact, this competition has attracted international interest and federal support. This webinar is being streamed in the Netherlands and in Denmark, where technology companies are eager to participate in New York Prize projects. Our colleagues at the US DOE are also lending their support by providing the DARE-CAM model, the Distributed Energy Resource Consumer Adoption Model, to Brookhaven National Lab in Long Island, as well as by funding groundbreaking work on microgrid controllers in Buffalo and Potsdam alongside NYSERDA. We look forward to your participation in this historic opening for New York to serve as an experimental testbed for innovative technologies across all applications and configurations, one that I think we're well positioned to capitalize on given our legacy of invention, innovation, and entrepreneurship, and the unique alignment of people and policy across New York State working to engage the private sector, increase system efficiency, and put in place a legacy future New Yorkers can benefit from and be proud of. Now I'm going to turn it over to John St. Cross, who will dive into the application process mechanics and expected outcomes for feasibility.
Thank you, Mike. Can everyone hear me? I think so. Okay, I'm going to give you kind of like 8 slides to go through to talk about the prize competition specifically. I'm going to skip through the first slide because Jim and Micah touched on REV, touched on the microgrid design projects that were already underway with NYSERDA, and Michael Rezanowski is going to talk about the critical facilities microgrid study, which a link is shown here. So let's go into New York Prize. New York Prize is a multi-stage competition. $40 million has been currently set aside in support of the competition. We have one RFP on the street, 3044, but the competition is actually comprised of 3 distinct stages. The first being we want to conduct feasibility assessments across a broad range of communities. That particular stage is open now for business. The second stage is going to be where we will pay people to conduct detailed engineering design and prepare detailed financial business plans for a microgrid design, community microgrid design. And the third stage will be naturally a progression from that, the build out of a design and operation. The competition is structured as an open enrollment structure, so typically when you run competitions, you get all the proposals in, you score them, and you pick the top 10. In this case, we're going to review proposals when we receive them and make decisions on funding for feasibility as we receive them and evaluate them. You can enter the competition without having been awarded for a previous stage. If you have conducted a feasibility assessment already, you can begin to think about entering stage 2 once those rules are open for the competition. You do not have to be part of stage 1 to get into stage 2, or you don't have to be part of stage 2 to get into stage 3. We don't have to award money. This schematic talks about the process for the entire competition. As Micah talked about earlier, all the communities in New York State are invited to compete and apply to the competition. The funnel is relatively wide at the top. We have 3 stages shown here. The first stage, stage 1, is where we look to award contracts to conduct feasibility assessments on the basis of your meeting very high-level threshold qualitative criteria in your application, your proposal, under this current RFP. Our hope is that we can award 25+ contracts, where we will provide up to $100,000 per contract. There is no cost share required. If your feasibility assessment as scoped out ends up costing more than $100,000, you'd have to make up that difference yourself. We are expecting allocation of from $2 to $3 million, but that just gives you a sense for the kind of allocation for stage 1. When you've completed your feasibility assessment, when stage 2 is open, you'll be able to submit your feasibility assessments under stage 2 for evaluation by a technical evaluation panel of experts. Again, there you would have threshold audit grade design criteria and specifications that you'd have to meet. If you meet those, you'd be subject to an award up to $1 million to conduct a detailed engineering design and finance and business plan. There, the cost share would be a minimum of 25%. So you would have to start putting a little more funding into the game to stay in the competition. And finally, as the funnel narrows down, those that get through the design stage can then submit their designs for evaluation against even greater criteria that we will spell out in stage 3. Hopefully we will award anywhere from 5 to 7, and there you're talking about greater monetary awards. They're not meant to cover the entire cost of a microgrid build out, but our hope is that we can supplement the funding you can get from private sources to make the project a go. This is a slide that depicts the competition schedule. Stage 1 proposals are being accepted now. They'll be accepted through May 15, 2015. These are tentative dates. These are our planned dates. We have the flexibility to extend dates depending on the degree of competition and the number of participants who may need another week or so to put a proposal in. We're not going to stand hard to these dates. If you've got 10 communities looking to put something in 7 business days, we're not going to exclude them from consideration. Our goal under stage 2 is to have that open for entries starting May 15th of this year, and stage 3 to be open for entries in July 15th of this year. So by the summer, the entire set of rules for the competition will be publicly available for those looking to enter the competition. And again, if someone's already doing design under a NYSERDA contract, for instance, and they can look at our stage 2 design criteria, they have the flexibility to submit for additional funding, supplemental funding to an existing contract should they demonstrate that they need that to meet our design specifications. So we hope to administer this as flexibly as possible to make sure that we are supporting the various competitors throughout different stages of the competition. I want to talk a little bit about, Mike had talked a little bit about the community prospects and some of the target opportunity zones and some of the minimum requirements, but this is a slide that kind of gives you an idea of the attributes of a good community prospect. What are we looking to have when folks are thinking about coming in and applying for the program? We assume that we're going to have some very, very complicated community teaming arrangements. It's not likely you're going to have one person that's going to do everything to make this happen. You may have one entity to sign a contract, but they're going to have a large team behind them, each having certain roles. Micah talked about targeted utility opportunity zones. We have maps for those. The utilities were kind enough to give us zones in their service territories where a microgrid may actually provide system benefit. And again, those would be ideal target locations for a community to try to erect a microgrid. We are looking to embed in the microgrid team a utility and a community municipal partnership. So more than likely we will want you to have letters of support from your embedded utility. They're probably necessary to be part of your team, as well as the municipal or local authorities. Micah talked again about trying to leverage a portfolio of existing programs and technologies that we support, whether they're supported through NYPA programs, NYSERDA programs, or utility, matching utility programs. The idea is energy efficiency, combined heat and power, the array of solar programs and other distributed technologies, battery storage, other storage mediums are all the types of technologies we want to test in this microgrid configuration. And as he said, we're now looking for diesel backup generators. There may be some requirements to have diesels as part of the mix, but we're looking to minimize that to the greatest extent possible. We're looking for a large mix of customer types. You must have at least one critical public facility in the mix. If you have more, great. But if you have a wastewater treatment facility, you know, a nursing home, those are facilities you have to link with the microgrid plan for submittal. $20 million of the money in this program is HUD money. It's Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery money. There are certain eligibility requirements attached to that money. So we're asking applicants to seriously consider their eligibility for those funds. In the first stages of the competition, it's likely that NYSERDA funds will be used to support the activity, but during build-out, if you're eligible for HUD money, you have to meet certain requirements in terms of the impacted populations based on their location, in terms of what weather impacts they've been subjected to in the last few years, and what kind of income levels there are that are involved. And obviously, as we've stated from the beginning, we're looking to have a successful microgrid that's a successful Rev laboratory as well. Again, $100,000 is available on a competitive basis, no cost share. You're expected to conduct a preliminary microgrid planning effort to submit a viable proposal with relatively high level criteria. We're not looking for a quantitative analysis, we're looking for a qualitative analysis. We are looking for a good team, and our RFP document will make that very clear when you read through it. We'll evaluate your proposals on an as-received basis, as I mentioned, against prescribed evaluation criteria. In the RFP document itself, you will see a sample statement of work. That will give you a very good idea of what contract you will enter into with NYSERDA, because that will be the work we expect to be conducted to conduct a feasibility assessment. You can increase the requirements, you can increase the specifications, but those are likely our minimum specifications that you must adhere to. Mike can provide the number for our outreach session. We will try to answer questions today from everyone, but we're only going to have limited time, and for those who are really seriously considering participating in the program, I would look to join us at 10 o'clock on the 25th. Some of the evaluation criteria, there are more criteria than these that we're going to apply, and they're going to change as you move through each stage of the competition, but obviously we're going to be evaluating overall cost and benefits. We've created a benefit cost model that Mike will describe at a relatively high level in the next set of slides, so I won't get into that, but we will be applying that in this competition. Obviously, the project has to contribute to the public need, you know, the safety and quality of life for residents in an outage situation. The middle bullets talk about technical and operational aspects of the project. It has to be technically capable of operating. It has to be reliable when the system is under duress. For instance, how many weeks will it be able to operate independent of the grid? 1, 2, 3? It has to function. To the degree it uses clean and renewable generating resources, that's going to make it highly desirable. And obviously, overall, you have to have the financial and managerial capabilities to actually build this out and operate it. It has to be something you can get private financing and capital for. So the next steps, for those, go to our website. The link is here. Look for RFP 3044, and the complete package of rules will show. You're going to start to think about assembling your working group and your core team, identifying local cluster of assets, including critical infrastructure, organizing and educating your core stakeholders. You can go to our FlexTech website to look up potential FlexTech contractors that could assist your community in doing the feasibility assessment, but you're free to use others. A lot of the New York Rising communities have consulting teams already on board. They more than likely will use their teams they already have, and if they decide to apply to the program. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's important in the next month or so to really think about the team and the structure and identifying the loads. Go back to those attributes, because that's what we're looking for, is how big is it, what's the mix of customers, what's its footprint look like, what types of problems is it solving. And that's, I think, all I have for now. I'm going to turn over the presentation now to Mike Resiliency.
Thanks, John. And so today what I'm going to do, I'll wrap everything up here. I'm going to give a brief overview of the critical facility study and how it ties together with the New York Prize efforts. And before I get started, I want to thank over the 75 plus people and 25 different organizations who aided in providing all of the content, the information, suggestions, and guidance that positively enhanced the final report. And I especially wanted to thank our other project team members, the Department of Public Service and Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, who are represented here today by Tammy Mitchell and Chuck Phillips. Thank you all. So we're getting this question a lot, and so we figured we'll let you know where we feel and where we stand about this. Mike has showed a slide earlier where we had the definition of microgrids, and we used that for our report, and that was a standard DOE definition. I want to give you a definition of what we're calling critical infrastructure or facilities. This is straight out of New York's public officer law. Didn't even know it existed until my folks at DHSES gave it to me. And basically, in a nutshell, it means systems, assets, places, or things, whether physical or virtual, so vital to the state that the disruption, incapacitation, or destruction of such items could jeopardize the health, safety, welfare, or security of the state, its residents, or its economy. That's what everybody's asking us, what is a critical facility? If it meets those definitions, we will consider those projects. Here we show you some types. Our study was focused only on microgrids for critical facilities, and we wanted to get sites that had all of these different types of critical facilities in them, and we pretty much did. There was a couple missing, but we touched on a bunch of them. So that's critical facilities for you. So as I step into the final report, I should say the work that we needed to do, our project team was tasked legislatively to develop recommendations regarding the establishment of microgrids in the state of New York. How microgrids can be used in New York State to maintain mission-critical operations during and after severe events, and whether critical facilities in the state of New York may desire to collaborate on microgrids. So we had to consider the geographic areas in the state where these microgrids should be a priority based upon severe storm damage in the years of 2011 and 2012, rolled into 13 a little bit. The regulatory, we had to address questions like the regulatory structure under which the microgrid system would operate, how the operations of the microgrid would conform with current utility requirements, the type of microgrid projects, the technical and regulatory aspects of how they'll be interconnected to the grid, the adequacy of microgrids to operate in emergency situations, and finally some funding mechanisms that should be considered in order to pay for the establishment, operations, and maintenance of such microgrids. If you looked at what was asked of us, the basis of this work was information that was in our 2010 study, and we built on this work to answer these questions in the report. However, the bulk of the work was to develop the 5 feasibility case studies and the cost-benefit analysis tool. That is what I'm going to focus on today in my presentation. If you look at the New York Prize effort, we want to build on this work by developing more case studies and a more refined cost-benefit analysis tool. We need more data points on microgrids, period. So, yeah, things jumpy. All right, so if you take a look at I'm going to do the New York City overview of the sites that we looked at, and this will be the only case study I look at today. The rest of them are in the final report. We chose sites in Broome, Rockland, Nassau, and Suffolk counties, along with this site in New York City. These were the most heavily impacted areas during those 2 years of storms, which included Sandy, Irene, and Lee, and there was an October 2011 snowstorm that we got information on. One of the other criteria that we developed was to try and keep the microgrid area to approximately a half-mile radius or less. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on and the reasons why. And in this New York City example, essentially this Metropolitan Hospital site runs from about 97th Street to 104th Street and First Avenue to Park Avenue. It's about the distance that we were looking at for a microgrid, especially in urban and suburban environments. So let me go a little bit over. This is the Metropolitan Hospital area, which includes the hospital, NYCHA housing complex, and the Verizon Telecom facility. So if you take a look at this, the facilities had about 2.8 megawatts of existing generation, and then we needed to add about 3.4 to complete the microgrid to get a total of about 6.1 megawatts of generation on those sites. And one of the key aspects in sizing your microgrid generation is to determine what loads are critical, what are optional, and what can be shut off during times of emergencies or during the microgrid outages and during operations of that microgrid. So here's a diagram of the electrical infrastructure along with new and existing generation sources. A little tough to read, but you can see this in the report. I really don't want you to read this because here's another diagram that shows the communication and control devices to go along with the electrical and the generation equipment here. And the key takeaways here is I want to show you these two diagrams so you can see the level of complexity associated with developing a microgrid over just traditional backup generation. The integrating of numerous generation sources that can individually not meet all of the load or demanded under that microgrid is a major challenge. There's technical challenges, there's a lot of regulatory, there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be addressed with this, but these two diagrams will show you that level of complexity. So if you take a look at the costs associated with this design, and remember this was a feasibility study, so we're looking for plus or minus 30% estimates. The total project cost was about $11 million. If you look at the electrical communication and controls, that's about $3 million in capital, and you throw in some of the engineering and other labor costs around that, that's another $2.5 million. That's almost half of the total project cost. This additional cost is one of the major obstacles in microgrid development. So on the cost side, we needed to look at the developing a cost-benefit analysis model to aid in our study efforts. And this included looking at energy benefits, including energy cost savings and reduction in the cost of your energy generation or distribution capacity, reliability benefits stemming from reduction exposure to power outages that are considered to be within the control of the utility, power quality benefits, including reductions in either frequency or voltage sags or any momentary interruptions, environmental benefits such as reductions in emissions of air pollutants, and uniqueness, and we thought this was one of its kind in this analysis, is the quantification of the public safety, health, and security benefits that potentially that microgrid could accomplish. So for these critical services that we looked at, we tried to use New York-specific information whenever possible. And we had some sites that had fairly recent data on the costs that were associated with providing those public services during Sandy, and we tried to utilize that information. If we couldn't get that, then we used the analysis method from FEMA in its methodology and its information to fill in those areas. And one of our efforts is to continue to refine this safety, health, and public service benefit that was not initially quantified in microgrid developments in the past. So where do we go from here? Part of our new model that was developed for our New York Prize activity will also take into account utility benefits. So if you look at the public safety and health benefits, now we want to look at utility benefits. And we posted this tool online now so people have access to it. It's on our webpage along with a couple of data capture sheets that we utilized in our study. Those will be utilized in the prize feasibility and detailed design efforts. You will have your project manager working with you on these projects to help fill in those data capture sheets to populate that tool, and we want to continue to refine it and use it. So let's get into the benefit side now that we have the model somewhat described. So let's look at the site benefits for this New York City site. And what we tried to do is target a cost-benefit analysis of a 1.0 or close to it. So if you looked at the previous slide, we had about a $910,000 a year cost based on all the capitalization of equipment at all over a 20-year period. And here we have $950,000 almost $80,000 benefit. So try to get that, positive cash flow here. And the two key points I want to raise on this is one of the main drivers of this, especially in New York City, is the capacity market for generators. However, you do not need a microgrid to make this happen. The generation sources provide that revenue. So, but you can utilize them to help your microgrid. That was one of our key findings from a benefit standpoint. And the second point you need to understand as you look through the study, the case study of the New York City site, and it's all in the back of the report, with no peak load support, you need on average 3 days of outage per year at this site to get a CBA of 1 for that 20-year period. That's 60 days of outage over a 20-year period. With peak load support, that's lowered down to about a day and a half of outages per year. So you can see some additional challenges around quantification and justification of your microgrid. So these are some of the study's findings. There's a whole host of other ones. These are just some of the key ones. So I want you to look at this. We did not find of the 5 sites a cost benefit that was economically feasible at these sites analyzed. And this was mainly due to robust generation that was installed, especially after Sandy. Some of these critical facilities even did N-1, N-2 type backup generation to help with their loads. The microgrid designs are highly unique. I mean, every one is unique. You have special engineering that needs to be done and a whole host of engineering teams that need to be involved. And as we showed earlier, you need to try to find some cost-effective ways to operate your microgrid beyond just as a backup generator. And that's that capacity market revenue and other revenues like that can aid in justifying your project. So as we look at what the recommendations came out of the report, we felt that, microgrid investments may provide important value streams for which there are presently no mechanisms to compensate microgrid or distributed generator owners for utility benefits or other societal benefits. And we're hoping that, in the REV proceeding, some of these issues will be addressed. We felt that we developed a useful cost-benefit analysis tool and expanded upon it for this New York Prize activity that will be used to try to account for the full spectrum of both cost and benefits associated with microgrids in a REV type of an environment. We also know that there's technology development that's required to reduce the cost of all that engineering, almost half the project total costs, around the communication controls and electrical infrastructure that needs to be looked at and addressed. Recently New York has won 2 DOE awards for microgrid controller development, which is one of those types of things. We also know that standards, models, and approaches to ensure effective microgrid integration within an existing utility distribution network need to be addressed. You look at where more complex microgrid configurations are with multiple DER sources, multiple points of connection to the grid, and connection to urban networks. So to follow up for a third time, we will have an outreach session that specifically will talk about the RFP 3044 and questions. I'll be putting that on Wednesday at 10 a.m. and there we'll address. I'll walk through the whole RFP and then I'll address your questions. So for the specific RFP, that's there, and that's all I had for the folks today. There's our contact information, and I open it up for any questions.
Hello, this is Jim Gallagher again, and I have received a number of questions that I'm going to field here and share with the various speakers. But before I do that, I just want to make a point that we will be sending out a link to the recording as well as the presentation, so everyone will have that if you registered for the event. In terms of our questions, I'm going to take them pretty much as they came in. I believe some of these may have been answered over the last 45 minutes, but if so, we will probably cut it short in terms of the amount of time we spend on it. One of the first questions we we received, and we received a number of questions associated with the REV proceeding. And the question that came in was, when can we expect the REV proceeding to resolve issues regarding utility ownership of DER assets and their role as distributed service platform providers? And you know, actually, let me take a quick stab at that, and then Tammy Mitchell, if you want to add to anything I say. I think the response would be that that is definitely an issue that is being considered by the Commission in the REV proceeding. There will be an order issued relatively soon by the Commission on the Track 1 of the REV proceeding, which will address a number of these issues, and there will also be a Track 2 for the proceeding, which will get into utility ownership issues as well as financial incentive issues. So I think, you know, for the purposes of New York Prize, I think the quick answer is it will be addressed in the REV proceeding. And Tammy, I'm just going to ask if you want to add anything to that, or if anything else necessary to say.
I'll just add, Jim, thanks, that I could give you even a little more detail in that it is on the public, there is a REV item listed on the public agenda for this Thursday.
Okay, so, good.
Yeah, I believe some of those issues, you know, will be addressed and more guidance provided.
Okay, thank you. And then a number of questions came in as we were going through. I think this one was answered, but I will ask Jonathan Cross to expand a little bit again. Just a question came in about the February 25th information webinar. If you could just say a little bit more about what would be covered during that webinar.
Yeah, I think what will go is Mike will spend some time in the webinar talking about the actual document itself, going through each part of the RFP to explain its intent and what we're asking folks to do. We're not looking to respond to every question in 1 hour. What we're hopeful to do is spend some time going through the RFP, take some questions, and I believe what we'll have is we'll have a number of business days after that for people to submit questions electronically to the New York Prize website. Then we would take those questions and then probably provide written responses on the website to the questions that we've received. So in that hour, if a question isn't there and we don't hear from anyone, they have an option of an hour later or a day later to put a question onto the page, and Mike and I will, and maybe even Micah, will draft a response so that there'll be responses a certain number of days. I think it's 10 business days. I forget the schedule in the RFP. But we'll have written responses to the questions. That's the process. And
one more easier way, too, so, and folks have been using it, Jim, is that give us a call.
You can do that too.
Or send us an email. So we get an answer and never we hit the street. So that's a simpler approach for people, too.
The benefit of having it written is that we can publish them and everybody can see their responses. It's hard to do it when you do it over the phone. Okay?
Okay, good. Thank you. And John, I want to come right back to you with this question, and that is, will PSE&G Long Island be included in the program? And associated with that, will there be any particular SBC requirements? So perhaps you could just say a little bit something about the focus of New York Prize on Long Island.
Right. First of all, the kinds of exclusions that people have been familiar with NYSERDA programs in the past do not apply for New York Prize. This is not SBC funding. It's different funding altogether. So all parts of New York State are eligible. There's no service territory exclusions or what have you.
Municipalities included.
Right. That's right. The municipalities can play as well. So the only obligation is someone's got to be able to have the authority to sign a contract with us on behalf of the teams.
Thank you. And Mike, I believe this question would be for you. Actually, it's a two-part question. And one is, could you expand a bit more on the definition of a critical facility? And then also related to that, why a half-mile limitation for projects?
Is that for Micah, John, or
No,
Jim,
no, that's for Mike Rezanowski.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We only did that as a rule of thumb for our project. As I said, if you saw, it's a function of costs. I mean, those electrical and communication costs, you saw how high they were in that little short radius of the New York City application, and we looked at other ones, so look through the site. You expand that to a mile or 2 or 3, you're going to double, triple, and quadruple those costs, and those are things we're looking to reduce. That's the reason why we use that as a rule of thumb, and that was based on our and what we found in some applications. It was easier for us to run our own wiring, less expensive than use existing utility wiring because of the number of switches that needed to be put in to isolate the microgrid. So every site's unique. That's just a rule of thumb. We think in a rural application you might be able to get away with a little bit longer, but let your project determine what makes sense. That was
okay.
Yep.
Do you want to say anything else, Mike Brazanowski, about the definition of a critical facility?
Well, that I think it's pretty self-explanatory there. As you reach out with our Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services folks, and I don't know if Chuck is still on the phone here, this is a straight definition from them. That's what they use and work with every day of their lives. They typically, don't have a list of the critical facilities, but that's it. That's the definition that we share. Chuck, did you have any questions or input to that? We must have lost.
Hey, Jim, the issue
Yeah.
on critical facility, let me just add one thing. If a community is really doing its thing on this, they're cultivating the right team, they probably should communicate with their county or municipal emergency management office, and they would obviously understand the definitions as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the questions that came in here, again, I think this is probably more related to Public Service Commission jurisdiction, but the question came in, will NYSERDA be providing guidance to local municipalities regarding utility franchise issues? And yeah, I think that my quick answer to that, and again, Tammy, maybe you can supplement, is that strikes me as more of a New York Public Service Commission jurisdictional issue where parties would need to go to seek guidance.
Yes, I agree with that. I'm not sure that what NYSERDA's
No,
role
it's
would
not
be.
our role.
We won't pass judgment. Ideally, good projects will identify all the hurdles and impediments they have to make a project go. In other words, if they came in and said, but for this and this project I can raise these sources of financing, I may need a little bit more from NYSERDA, but I still have to do these 2 things. And then therefore, that's the decision the Commission gets to make on whether or not there's an exemption specific to this project or what have you. If it's a REV demonstration, that's not a call NYSERDA is going to make. But it's clearly going to come up for these projects. We would expect it. And we expect these detailed designs to cover that eventuality.
And currently, the way things stand, microgrid projects have petitioned the Commission for determination of certain issues, particularly the legal issues.
I'm going to go with probably 3-4 minutes of questions, and I do want to point out that NYSERDA will be providing a response to all the questions and developing an FAQ that will be made available to all who registered for this webinar. Just to continue the questions, and John St. Cross, I believe this is for you. How do potential applicants find the maps for the opportunity zones?
Those maps are actually on the New York Prize website. If you look under resources, I can't describe whether they're on the left-hand side in the drop-down list or in the body, but you go into the site, I think resources for applicants, and you'll find the maps, and you can click on that, and then you'll start to identify parts of the state. If you click on a part of the state, it zooms down to that part of the state. So it should be on the website. New York Prize website.
John, I want to follow up just with another question I believe would be for you. A question came in saying that as they understand at stage 1, cost share is not required. Stage 2, cost share 25%. But the question is, what is the cost share for stage 3?
Well, it's probably going to be a lot higher because I think, again, there's going to be a minimum because at the end of the day, we're going to have to leverage our dollars as much as possible. So it's not going to, I don't have a figure right now, but it's going to be pretty high. Obviously, if somebody can do a benefit cost in their microgrid and they have a benefit cost greater than 1, then they really don't need a lot of money from the New York Prize award pot. Someone else may have a benefit cost, let's say, I'm just thinking out loud, of 0.85, and they may find that they're valuing carbon at the default values in the benefit cost model, and again, we don't really monetize carbon, so maybe they need a million or 1.8 or whatever the number is to make the gap up between raising the private capital and money from the state. So we'll have minimums, probably no less than 50%, but I'm assuming it's going to be higher than that because, again, a good microgrid is going to cost some money to build and operate.
Thank you, John. Mike Rosnowski, I believe this question is for you, and it has to do with opportunity zones. And the question is, how competitive will communities really be that are located outside of opportunity zones?
Yeah, and that's, we've been fielding this question a lot, whether people say, well, I'm not in the opportunity zone, should I apply? And we're saying yes. And what we really want to say to folks, and I've answered it a bunch of people with, those utility opportunity zones are just showing you where additional utility benefits are, or maybe the higher utility benefits are for your microgrid. But if you have a community and a good microgrid project that had other great benefits, societal and who knows the other economic benefits that are associated with it, and maybe lighter or smaller utility benefits that are outside those zones, we will entertain those projects just as well. Obviously, it comes down to, that's just there to help you with that additional utility benefit, but you still can acquire some in certain areas. So work with your utility folks in your community and figure that all out.
Mike, I'm going to follow up with another question for you quickly, and that the question was, for the purpose to the Phase 1 feasibility study, is it advisable to supplement the benefit cost analysis tool that NYSERDA will provide with the DERCAM tool that you mentioned earlier?
Well, here's what we're doing for all the folks is we're going to have a contractor utilize that tool for everybody. So for the sites themselves, all they have to do is fill out the data capture worksheets and the data questionnaires, which is what we utilized in our feasibility analysis. And we did that for two reasons. Number one, we didn't want to have the individual people utilize that tool. Even though we shared it publicly with everybody, we're going to have a user manual come out, show you how to use it. If you want to take it, do whatever you want with it. That's a different tool than the DERCAM tool. The DERCAM tool is very similar to the Homer modeling tool, and we'll have to get into that a little bit. There's a little bit different requirements around maximizing your generation sizing, and we discussed that in the report. So the cost-benefit analysis tool will come with a NYSERDA project manager and a contractor to help run those numbers. And the reason why we did this is we want to keep everybody on the same CBA analysis if we're going to compare them, and all they need to do is fill out their questionnaires properly.
Mike, I'm going to follow up again with a question. A question came in about the projects that come in and that are actually submitted to NYSERDA. Can they be posted or made available in any way, or represented on a map? And also related to that question, will the submissions for any phase be considered intellectual property and potentially a redacted copy made available to third parties? So it's a two-part question. I mean, will other parties be made aware of the application? And second, what would be made available to them in terms of potentially a redacted copy of the proposal?
Well, here's the way we handle that, and it is in the RFP, and these are a lot of the questions that we're going to talk about on Wednesday. To answer your first question, typically when NYSERDA gives an award, we make that public. And whether, Micah wants to put it on a map somewhere, we can do that on this website. That's fairly easy. People who don't win an awards, we'll have a debrief with them and they can resubmit. And that's all going to happen within a week. Essentially, we're going to hold these technical review committees once a week, and you can read that in the RFP. To answer your second question is, read the RFP again. It says just stamp the pages, you say confidential, and none of that information will be shared. So we have that process. We've utilized it in other programs throughout NYSERDA. So whatever you don't want shared, put confidential on that sheet. It tells you this right in the RFP. And the maps thing might be a good idea. We definitely will publish a list, and we're creating that list of awardees that we'll get out there someday. maybe some
Okay.
press releases, et cetera.
Thank you, Michael.
welcome.
With that, I'm going to end the Q&A period, and I'd like to thank everyone for submitting the questions and also participating. And with that, I want to hand it back over to Brian from Agrion.
Thanks, Jim. And with that, I just want to thank everybody again for joining us today. And as Jim mentioned before, the link for the recording and for the presentation will all be sent around. The presentation will be uploaded to the meeting page that you used to register, and that will be up sometime later this afternoon. So thank you again for everybody for participating, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Yeah.